G'day, it's your old mate Matthew here. Welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. In this episode, we have a good yarn with Gary Shaw, and this is really summed up by culture. You know, expects us to be Batman or Superman, but at the end of the day, we're human and we need connection, and there's a whole lot of impacts that come with trying to be Batman or Superman. He details his journey to be a detective Southeast Asia, hunting sex trafficking, to the spiritual, emotional, all the impacts of doing that, and then finding his way into sustainability and inner developments. Look, it is quite the journey, and there's a few trigger warnings in there around the sex trafficking, the suicide, and a couple of other things there. So please bear with us and look after yourself during this one. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Hello and welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. Today we have Gary Shaw with us in the High Tech podcast. How are you, Gary?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Matt. Good to be here.
Thank you. Gary's a modern slavery specialist, a sustainability consultant, and an inner development advocate. That's quite the sort of description there.
It's a rare and unique concoction or cocktail.
I like that concoction. Yeah, definitely. Yes. What have you struggled with in the last week?
What have I struggled with that's worth confessing to on a podcast in the last week? I think I'm currently writing a book, and I say that loosely because that's what I've struggled with the last week. Is there's all these, theories around how to be creative effectively, and writing is one of those practices that I'm discovering you just have to sit down and do regardless of how you feel, and so I guess that's what I've been struggling with the last week is being consistent enough to just sit down and do it even when I don't feel like doing it, and when I don't feel like I have anything creative to say.
And is there a point around? I know you're kind of moving house and moving around a bit at the moment. Do you have a deep work or creative zone to go into? Zone or space?
I do. We've had my mother-in-law staying actually for 2 months, and I say that with a smile because she is lovely, and but it necessitated me leaving the house to go to what was my office. So I've been working out of my an office at my mother's place, and that's amazingly helped. Just having a place that's outside the home where you sort of intentionally have to go to. I guess it's a hack of sorts that I didn't intend to come up with, and I discovered by accident that you've got to get out of the house, out of your pajamas and your usual place of relaxation or comfort, and go to another place that for whatever reason the energy is closer to the surface. The veil is thinner, and the creative juices tend to flow there. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, following on, what would you like to work on in the next week?
My book.
Yeah.
It's based on a true story, actually. A 15-year-old girl that I met while I was working covertly in the anti-trafficking space in Thailand, actually. She was a 15-year-old girl who grew up in Burma, now called Myanmar by some, and a very poor family. Her auntie came to her family and promised her a job in northern Thailand, where they said she'd be able to work in a clothing factory and send money home to support her very poor family. And so reluctantly her parents said that she could go with her auntie. They trusted the auntie. Unfortunately, the auntie took her across the border into Thailand, took her straight to a brothel, and sold her. Because she was a virgin, she sold her for a very high, very large amount of money. Her name was Esther. And so Esther was sadly locked up for several weeks until the brothel manager could find someone who was willing to pay the very high price to rape a virgin. And sadly, he did find someone, and sadly, Esther was brutalised and then put out with all the other young girls in exactly the same situation in this brothel, locked up and essentially raped for profit many times a day, to make a lot of money for this criminal enterprise. And one of my colleagues, 8 months later, one of my colleagues, posing as a customer, wearing a covert camera, was able to infiltrate that brothel, pay for Esther, and then in the privacy of the bedroom, make up an excuse as to why he didn't actually want to go ahead and have sex, and then just asked lots of questions and earned her trust, and she told him the truth about her situation. So he then took that evidence to the local authorities. They raided the brothel, rescued Esther and the other girls working there, or being sold there, I should say, arrested the perpetrators. So the next day they brought the girls back to collect their belongings from the brothel, and they went into the bedroom, or the prison cell that Esther had been locked up in, and above the bed upon which she had been raped every day was this writing on the wall. And they said, "Esther, what's this writing?" And she said, "Well, I come from a Christian tribe in Burma, and my parents each night would read me a poem from the Old Testament, and this is one of those poems." And they said, "Well, would you tell us what it says?" And Esther said, "It says, 'God, you are my light and my liberation. Whom shall I fear? God, you are the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh, even then I will trust that you are good, that you are for me, and that I am loved." And so when I met this, I guess now 15, 16-year-old, very small, petite girl, teenage girl from the heart of Southeast Asia, she embodied a level of presence and a level of courage and a depth that I recognised that I did not possess myself. And her presence, her character, and I guess the depth of humanity that she somehow discovered inside this place of slavery, really had a large and ongoing impact on me, such that many years later, when I burned out as this well-meaning but slightly intense investigator trying to rescue women and children from human trafficking, her story stayed with me. So long story short is my book is about a well-meaning but slightly intense investigator who's trying to rescue women and children from slavery and so on. And he comes across a teenage girl who, even though she is a slave, at a level of identity, she is more free than he is, and she sets him free from all of his certainties and dogmas. So that's essentially the kernel of the book.
Wow. The line, "devour my flesh," is just going round in my head. That's very raw and real. We're going to obviously get into this a bit more, but it must be... how do you find the creative process of trying to honour that story and perhaps the intensity of all of that? I suppose, but you've lived that for a while as well, right?
Yes, I did. I worked as an investigator. I was a detective in the New Zealand Police for many years, and then worked 8 years as a human rights investigator, for want of a better word, working in 12 countries, pretending to be a pedophile or a sex tourist, wearing cameras and using some pretty high-tech equipment that we sourced from the same vendor who supplies organisations like the CIA and and FBI. So we had some great gear, and the mission, should we choose to accept it, was to gather really damning and compelling evidence that that once we had it, we would then take to the local authorities to, in many ways, compel them, even though they may be complicit sometimes or indifferent, certainly, to what was going on, the evidence would be so great that they could not act. And so we worked in 12 nations, most of them developing countries, and during that time rescued several hundred women and children, but ultimately failed to rescue many thousand. And as I said earlier, unsurprisingly, I burned out a couple of times on the back of doing that work.
We'll jump into that very shortly. What are you proud of?
What am I proud of?
The hundreds of girls you've saved?
What am I proud of? I suppose what first comes to mind is I wouldn't say that I saved them. I was there, and I had a role to play, and often we did work alone. But I want to say that I wouldn't have been there without a huge support network and supportive family, and so it never felt like. I mean, I part of what drove me to do this work was certainly my aspirations to be James Bond and Batman and every childhood hero that I grew up with, wanting to make the world a better place. But as time went on, it was actually that same false, flawed, and ultimately fictional understanding of what it means to be heroic that led to my burnout. And so I suppose I'm proud of still being here. And I don't say that hopefully egotistically. When I say burnout, I the first time I burned out, it involved divorce, depression, and long periods of curling up in a fetal position full of despair, because I set out to save people and to make the world a better place, and suddenly I was the one whose marriage was falling apart and who needed help saving, and who was only seeing their children part time, and that was never part of the plan. And there were some really dark times, and so I suppose proud conjures up all sorts of imagery, but I'm grateful. Perhaps what I'm most grateful for is all of the people and the networks and resources, the books, the retreats that just help me find to touch upon in a very, very small way, and I don't mean to compare myself in any way to Esther's experience, because I could never understand or comprehend what she went through, but just to touch a little bit of what it might mean to get your significance, purpose, meaning, worth, and identity from who you are, not from what you do. And that's probably what I'm most grateful for.
It leads into our next question. Now, we'd been asking what gives you hope, but I think the better question is what gives you meaning?
Yeah, what gives me meaning? The motivation that led me into that world in the first place was, I grew up in a evangelical Christian environment, and that was sort of that was certainly the worldview that I had when I first went into this work. But my evangelical lens slowly eroded and ultimately imploded and collapsed under the weight of what I saw and what I experienced. So I suppose what gives me meaning now is I would say a deeper trust, actually, a deeper trust. Not in what I, at an egotistical kind of level, might believe and therefore am certain about, but rather what I fall into in my lack of certainty, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I met there's a wonderful book called The Shack that had a big impact on me, and I was fortunate enough to spend some time with the author. And he said, the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's certainty. And it was the beginning of a journey in real trust, trusting not in what I intellectually assented to as the source of meaning, but what I was willing to trust and let go of my certainties around, and basically fall into, and to trust the darkness, really, to trust that even in the darkness I was held, and in the uncertainty I was known. So without getting too too philosophical, or at the risk of losing myself and you and whoever's listening, I suppose what gives me meaning is a practice of contemplation, really, a daily practice of sitting still, in silence and solitude, and dropping into presence that I feel holds me regardless of what I believe or don't believe on any given day.
So I hear what you're saying, but I have a slightly different interpretation of it. I would check it with you. It's the certainty of who you are and what you're about, or where you're heading, right? Would that be a way of putting it? The trusting in the process, trusting in who you are to carry about your day, or is it more than that?
Yeah, for me it's about seeing, or at least recognizing that I have a conceptual understanding of who I think I am, and then recognizing that or even if I just pause on that, who I think I am, who is the I who sees me? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's at one level, it's yes, at a psychological, sociological, emotional, spiritual kind of sense, I have an idea of who I think I am, but then it's carrying that very lightly and not actually putting my trust in that, and trusting that beyond that, that I'm much more than that. And even though I can't fully, I don't want to get lost in words or conceptual thinking that ultimately the ground falls away. It's learning to not trust what my ego can grab hold of.
Sure.
But rather trusting that when I let go actually of what my ego conceives as this is me and this is where I'm going, and that actually I can carry that really lightly. I can let go of it, and trust in the arms that hold me, even though I may be completely wrong, or not want to say wrong, or limited in how I see myself, because we're also limited, delusional, blind in how we see ourselves and life, and that can change from one moment to the next depending on our emotions and beliefs.
What's going on?
And I suppose if I could sum it up, Dr. James Finley is a psychotherapist, that author, wonderful, wise man, and he says, we spend most of our lives trying to get the ocean into our thimble, and we are the thimble. We're trying to get all of these, whatever it is, the latest self-help book, 5 easy ways to blah blah blah, but he said the invitation is to let go of trying to get the ocean into the thimble, and to allow you, the thimble, to drop into the ocean. And it's a really I suppose so. Probably didn't expect to go there in terms of where do you get your meaning, but I get my meaning, given all that I've been through, I get my meaning from letting go of trying to nail down and define that thimble, knowing that it will always be limited, and actually in letting go of that, that I'm much freer and am held in my not knowing.
I like that. So let's dive into your journey to be a detective, or undercover detective, chasing child sex trafficking. How did how did you get into that? You touched on, wanting to be Batman or Superman or whatever. How did that come about?
Yeah, circuitously, a long journey. I mean, I went to Canterbury University in Christchurch and did a BA, psychology, sociology. I knew I wanted to work with people. I then got a scholarship to work, or to study rather, in the United States at a university that had developed this program to train people to go to the third world, the developing world. They had a business school where you could learn to create small business enterprises to help people get employed and break the poverty cycle, or for those with an arts degree like myself to work with social service projects and things like that. And when I was at Canterbury University, I volunteered to run the 40-hour famine, the World Vision 40-hour famine. I'd done it, in Sunday school as a child and then at high school, but up until then, no one had run a 40-hour famine at university. And so because I volunteered, they sent me all the information so that I could speak intelligently to what they would do with the money. And that year, the theme was "Don't Rubbish the Children." And the money was to go to children living on the streets of cities throughout the world, street children. And so I remember sitting in my house in St Albans, Shirley, Christchurch, New Zealand, reading about children in our cities all over the world who were forced to sell themselves to survive, to have food. And I was so naive and I guess privileged that I, growing up with Oliver Twist and other stories of the African American transatlantic slave trade, I had just assumed that slavery and that kind of exploitation had somehow ceased. So to discover actually that there were more children being forced to sell themselves for a loaf of bread in the world today than ever before in history, some as young as my little sister at the time, really just broke my heart. And so it was that led me to this university in the States where they were doing this degree program, training people to go to the third world to do something meaningful about it. So that's how I ended up there. But then I came out with a master's degree and highly educated white kid from New Zealand, but with no third world experience or language ability or cultural understanding. And it was just at the time when relief and development organisations were wisely learning that they could employ and have a much greater impact with 20 locals for the same amount as sending some idealistic white kid from New Zealand. So
saved you, yeah.
So I really struggled and ultimately came back to New Zealand. No one wanted to employ me, and I thought, well, screw that. I'll try and do what I wanted to do as a boy, which was ultimately end up in the police. Became a detective, and then 11 years into my career, came across an organisation based in Washington DC that employed detectives to go to the third world. So I suppose that's a short summary of it was the perfect for me. It felt like this is why I'd been born. It was the perfect combination of my education and policing experience and what I'd learned there, and the opportunity to really make what I thought to make a real difference.
Yeah, I mean it's a quick summary. I know there's more to it than that, but how prepared were you for your first mission? So you jump on a plane to wherever in Southeast Asia?
Philippines.
Philippines?
Yeah.
How prepared were you?
At one level, the organisation had given me some training and a few tips. And at another level, I was prepared in the sense that I had been in law enforcement and criminal investigations here in New Zealand. And as I said, I had completed a master's degree in Third World Community Economic Development, is what it was called. So I had some understanding of the need to be cross-culturally sensitive and so on. So at one level I was prepared. At another level I was not prepared at all. I was a married man. I had 2 young children, and I was sent by myself to Angeles City, which is a large go-go bar area set outside of Clark Air Force Base, which was formerly a huge American Air Force Base in the Philippines, and unsurprisingly there was a huge red light sex district surrounding it, and sadly a lot of very young girls were being trafficked and forcibly sold. So this wasn't about prostitution, this was about slavery, about human trafficking. And so I was sent there to find and document cases. And so so I spent several weeks going from go-go bar to go-go bar. And a go-go bar, for those who haven't spent time in one, is in a very hot, humid part of Southeast Asia. It's a very cool, air-conditioned, comfortable, pleasant place to spend time, where upon entry you're asked what you want to drink. You buy a cold beer. You can sit in a booth and watch on a raised stage anywhere from 10 to 50 half naked or fully naked, gorgeous, teenage and 20-somethings women parade themselves, doing their best to catch your eye, to flirt, to seduce you. Some of them would then come down on the stage and flirt with you. Some of them would sit on your knee. Some of them would try and put their hands all over you and put their breasts in your face, basically doing everything they could so that you would buy them. Because if you wanted to have sex with them, you then would pay a bar fine to the bar. So the bar gets their percentage. The girl then comes back with you to your hotel. You then pay her for her fee, and everybody's happy. So everyone's trying to seduce you, basically, and make money from you.
Mm.
My goal there was not to be seduced and so to maintain my personal and professional purity, if you like, and to gather evidence of the 13-year-old girl who's also dancing on that stage, who isn't there voluntarily, who has been trafficked, and to make, to seize an opportunity to interact with her somehow, without looking suspicious and without getting discovered. Obviously, I was wearing a covert camera. If the people running that place found the camera, I was toast. And so that was what I was not prepared for, was spending hours and hours and hours in these highly seductive, sexually charged environments, pretending to be aroused and noticing the woman, and stay focused on why I was there, what I was there for. I think too, coming out of that environment each evening and not having any kind of debriefing, any kind of support, any kind of anyone to yarn to or chat with or just debrief with, over time. I mean, and that was one mission. It lasted 4 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks working in those go-go bars, I had found and documented several underage girls who were not there voluntarily, and we did an operation with the NBI, the National Bureau of Investigation, which is like the Filipino FBI, and we did rescue those women, and several bar owners were arrested and prosecuted. But that was just one mission, and I spent 4 years in environments like that, and what I was not prepared for was the impact of that.
So through that time, I mean, it's just so many questions. There's just a lot there, right? Through that time, your manager, your boss, they're in the States?
Yes.
Were they military style or sort of approach to this?
Well, they were American law enforcement, and so in one sense, again, we shared the same skill set and same lens when it came to law enforcement. But in other ways, there were large cultural differences, and also there was just lovely people, great organisation, but just there was the organisation was 6 years old when I started working for them, and there was just a lack of awareness of the toll, I think, that not only working covertly, working undercover, as it were, but working cross-culturally undercover in a place where you didn't have support, you didn't have backup, you didn't know the language, where if you got into trouble, there was no one coming, and the sexual, emotional, spiritual, human toll that it incrementally took on me over the first 4 years that I did this work for the American organisation.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? So you went from there and you started your own organisation in New Zealand.
Yes.
Was there a realisation that you needed to take care of yourself, or was it hey, I would like to do something, I would like to try it from a different angle?
No, I wish I could have. I wish I could say that it was, that I realised that I realised what I needed, that I could actually have seen it and even asked for what I needed. But no, if only life worked that way.
Well, there can't be a handbook for this kind of thing, right?
No handbook. Well, if there is, I haven't seen it. So no, I mean, one of the most successful operations I was involved in was in southern Malaysia, where I documented nearly 100 women who were being sold from 7 different nations that all been trafficked to this one bar, and they'd sent the American investigator, but he'd been turned away because he was a bit suspicious. So they sent the Kiwi, and so I rocked up pretending to be a lost backpacker and arrived just as a busload of Chinese tourists from across the border in Singapore had arrived, and so I disappeared into that throng and was able to get inside. And I spent 3 days going backwards and forwards, documented 3 different women. One of those women spoke really good English, and she was from Thailand. She'd been deceived and then raped and locked up, but she spoke really good English, and so in order to get her, she was really wary of speaking to me though inside the brothel, because she was worried that she'd be overheard and punished accordingly. So I said, well, I'll buy you out to my hotel, which was down the street, which they did if they really trusted the punter. So they allowed me to buy her out. They sent 2 very large men to come down with me and make sure that they got a copy of my real passport. They checked the room to make sure that I was legitimately staying there, and they brought the girl down, and then they would come back and pick her up in the morning. So it meant that over the course of that night, I got to debrief her fully. She told me everything, like how the place operated, who the corrupt officials were, where they hid the girls when the police would do a raid. And because of the information she gave me, we were able to give that intelligence to the authorities in the capital, in Kuala Lumpur. But we couldn't use the local police because they were corrupt. They sent a team down and they rescued 99 women. So it was the largest successful anti-trafficking operation of its kind, and like nearly 100 women from 7 different nations who were ultimately repatriated to their homelands, and tearful reunions with family members who thought their daughters had been killed. So that was wonderful. The price, though, was that I had a woman a 20-something-year-old Thai woman, sleep in my bed. We didn't have sex. She tried, and I said no. I made up some story as was our practice, and so we didn't have sex. The information led to this huge, quote, success, but my marriage was never the same from that point on, and the fractures began to only widen. I don't know, again, coming back to your question, I don't know how, there was no guidebook for how to do this work well. It was very much making it up as you went along, and there was a lot of great intentions and a real desire to make a difference. But there was no awareness on my part of the need for self-care. I didn't even know what that was. Certainly no self-compassion or the need for to look after myself or in any way ask for what I need. Sadly that those cracks and those fissures in my own marriage ultimately led to our divorce 4 years later. We came back to New Zealand. I was back in the police for a couple of years, and it was only 2 or 3 years later after I wrote a book actually about my experience that was published. And
that was under a pseudonym, wasn't it?
It was under a pseudonym, yes, for legal and security reasons. It was under a pseudonym. And then a number of people who read the book said, hey, you know how to do this work and now you know how not to do it. What if you could start a New Zealand organisation and learn from the mistakes you made so that you actually had debriefing and support and counselling, not just for the investigators but for their partners and their spouses, given that you're sending men largely into really dangerous environments. Do it smarter, do it wiser, essentially. So that's where the New Zealand organisation came from.
It's really hard to comprehend the situations you've put yourself in to do good, right? That's sort of needing all the virtues of a saint, really, to go and do that, right?
Yes. If only I was a saint.
So tell us about the kind of the next part. So you've done it. You've got you've set up this own organisation, and you've gone back with a bit more support. How did that go for you and your well-being and your virtues? Let's call it the second time round.
The first implosion that related to my marriage falling apart, and when we came back from the United States was horrific enough. I mean that again, just that sense that I set out to do good, never intending to have it contribute to the demise of my own family, and so that was incredibly painful for everyone involved. 4 years later, or at least 4 or 5 years later, after doing this, launching a New Zealand anti-trafficking organisation, I burned out a second time. Yes, we were slightly wiser and smarter in terms of having support and counselling for investigators, but ego was still a huge ego and shadow, which we can get into that. But my own ego, the egos of others in the organisation, the egos of those on the board of the organisation. There was a lot of ego. And so when things fell apart a second time, this time it wasn't just my marriage and family falling apart. It was my very sense of who I was and why I was, why I thought I was here. So that reference I made to earlier, the author of The Shack, his words suddenly came alive for me, in the sense that I remembered him saying, when his life fell apart, it was horrific, but looking back, I'm so grateful that it happened, because now I don't get my significance, purpose, meaning, worth, or identity from what I do, but from who I am. And when he said that the first time, I thought, that sounds so wonderful. I mean, it's like someone speaking another language. Like, that would be lovely. But I don't know what that's like, and I don't know how to get there. But maybe one day, while kicking and screaming with the world falling apart around me, when the New Zealand organisation fell apart, that was my reckoning, because everything that I did get my significance, identity, etc. from was suddenly gone. And yeah, so that was one of the hardest years of my life. And yet, as he said, like 8 or 9 months later, I could just begin to say very faintly, but with huge gratitude, that wow, maybe there is something more to me than just what I do, and if so, what is that? And could I, like him, source my sense of identity like Esther? And that's where I remembered that small little petite girl from Burma, who became a real inspiration from me. What if it's possible to just touch a little bit of her magic, and to source in this darkness the same sense of groundedness that she discovered, that there is in all of us something that is not subject to the brutality of our own will or anyone else's will, something that no one can take away from us. What if I could find that ground? And what would my life look like if I could stand upon and rest in that place?
There's quite a journey to get to there. Was there a moment in a car on the side of the road when it was pissing down with rain?
There was, yes. Yeah, there was. Things came to a head one night. I had a part-time job. It was pretty depressing. I was serving papers on people on behalf of a private investigator, telling them that they were bankrupt, or that their power was going to be cut off, or that they were, going to be sued or arrested, or all manner of sad news. And I'd been looking for this one man who had been eluding me, and I finally saw that he was home, and was able to serve papers on him. And it was in the middle of winter in Christchurch. It was freezing cold, and there was this big storm coming through. It was pouring with rain, howling wind. I served these papers. I started to walk away, and he just verbally let loose at me. He was, "You're nothing but a effing parking meter warden," and said lots of other wonderful things. So I was already feeling pretty low, and to be, for a former police detective to be told that he's lower than a parking warden, an attempt to puncture the ego. The ego was already punctured. So I got back in the car, and the wind was so strong that it was rocking the vehicle side to side, rain howling down on the windshield, and this dark, mentally, I just threw my copy of the paperwork on the chair beside me, and just sat there in the cold and the dark and the wet, with the car rocking backwards and forwards in this storm, and just sat with the words that this man had just fired at me. And this dark chasm kind of opened up before me and invited me to descend down it. And again, I can't really explain it. Perhaps it's not something you can logically explain, but just in that moment, something changed within me, and those words, "I no longer get my significance, purpose, meaning, worth, identity from what I do," came to mind. And it wasn't something intellectual that I decided, like I was trying to reference earlier. It's not something that I'm going to think this from now on, or I believe this from now on. It was far deeper than that, but something changed, and I surrendered to whatever that invitation was, and the dark chasm closed. I didn't descend into the place of despair and depression that I had become quite familiar with by that time. And I started the car and drove off, but it was just one of a series of moments of transformation where I felt like I was being changed. I wasn't the one doing it. I was participating. I was giving my consent, and certainly each time surrendering a little bit of what I felt like was ego, and attachment to something that was transient, that was always an illusion. But it gave me that sense of security and safety, and by letting it go, I dropped down into that place, as I said, that was more solid.
So from there, you started a journey to, I'm going to say, go to the shack, but it's what was the author's name?
Paul Young,
Yep.
William Paul Young is the author of a book called The Shack. Yeah.
And you went to a course or a workshop or a retreat with him
Yes.
following that?
Yes, no, actually, I'd already heard him speak, actually, when I was going through the divorce, someone gave me a copy of The Shack, and I read it, and amazing book, highly recommend it. Really healing and transformative. He never intended it to be a book. He wrote it for his children, and it's now wrote a story for his children, and it's now in 25 million copies in print. And incredibly healing. But I read it, and like many wonderful books, I put it back on the bookshelf and thought, if only that was true, right? And then fast forward some years later, some lovely friends said that they were going to a conference in Hawaii, and that they could see that I was starting to burn out, and they said, we'd love to pay for you to come with us to Hawaii. And the speaker at this conference was William Paul Young, the author of The Shack. So, yeah, that was where I heard him speak, and that's where I heard him say that line that really stuck with me.
So from that moment in the car, what was the healing journey? What did you go and do after realizing you've been to the depths of despair, and then kind of something's changed? Where to from there?
Well, I needed to do something less traumatic work-wise, and I saw that the outdoor adventure company, Kathmandu, was looking for a human rights manager, and I never planned to work in the corporate space, but we had an honest conversation, and they said they were genuine about wanting to put their values into practice and make sure that their products weren't made with anyone working in slavery, and so I started to work in the corporate space. Alongside that, I suppose I started to learn about the importance, or not just know the importance. That's a terrible word. I started to learn about the critical need for what we've lost, so many of us, self-compassion. That caring for yourself was not selfish, but rather it was loving, and that indeed the way we care for and love ourselves is the way we love and care for others. And I'd grown up with this kind of, as I said earlier, this kind of shallow and I would say fundamentally flawed evangelical lens, which says that you should sacrifice yourself for others. And certainly there are rare times and occasions where that is the only choice. But love, if anything, what a healthy and mature, I believe, Christian understanding is, a life-giving one that's inclusive and whole, is that love is one, and how you love anything is how you love everything. So fundamentally, if you don't love yourself in the same way that you love God and others, that ultimately there's a oneness, there's a divinity, there's a sacredness in all things, and so the split, this artificial separation that was that we were taught growing up was flawed and false. So I sought to heal my way through that by learning about self-compassion, doing some mindfulness meditation courses, learning the connection between serotonin and in your gut and diet. And I was for a while taking antidepressants and thinking that would fix the serotonin in my brain, only to discover that I don't know if it's 80 or 90% of serotonin is manufactured in your gut, and that if you change your gut health, you change your brain health and things like that. It's like, what?
Yeah, right. So, but it's these are it's simple, it's obvious, right? Eat well, all those the kind of things related to that, but it's hard to follow that.
Yes. It is typically hard to follow unless you're coming out of the belly of the beast, and your option is to either continue with antidepressants or which are not bad and sometimes necessary, but I didn't want to be on them forever, and so by changing my diet, by exercising more intentionally, by developing a practice, like I said earlier, of contemplation and meditation, learning about self-compassion, and Brene Brown, all her work around the importance of, or not the importance, I don't want to use that word because it's not important, just the life-giving and life-saving discovery or portal rather that courage and vulnerability and it is for all of us, but especially for men who have been taught that that's a soft skill or is somehow not critical to our overall health as individuals, but as a society and a healthy masculinity.
Well, you can't have courage without vulnerability. I like that saying from Brené Brown. Jumping ahead a bit, what was the journey into the inner development goals?
Yes, so many of your listeners will be familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN some years ago came up with these what they call Sustainable Development Goals, basically targets that we need to reach if, as a human species, we're going to continue. Healthy food, soil, water, air.
Well-being it's the green one, which was 4 or 6.
Yep, well-being. Just so all of these essential steps that we needed to be taking as a human species, and that governments and corporations needed to be aiming for. So all around the world, until recently, most governments, or many governments, I should say, and large corporations aligned their vision, their future, certainly their sustainability goals with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. However, it's quite clear that 15 plus years on, we are not going to achieve the UN SDGs. We're going in the opposite direction. So many of the same people behind the UN SDGs said, "Why is this? Why are we going the wrong way?" We have all. It's not a matter of know-how. It's not a matter of science and technology. We know what needs to be done. Why aren't we doing it? And what came out of all of this research, consultation with again universities, thought leaders, governments, was that we lack the inner capacity to do so. We lack the inner courage, the humility, the willingness to put our ego aside and collaborate. So the IDGs, or Inner Development Goals, were created as an immediate and very practical and tangible pathway that individuals, organisations and governments could implement in recognition that that what we do internally is how we don't, as the psychologists tell us, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And so until we change our lens, until we change the way we see the world, we won't recognise the divinity in other people or the sacred nature of Mother Earth, or we will just see trees as resources to cut down and use for our own. That if we don't change, it's almost, I hesitate in a setting like this, certainly in a corporate setting, although increasingly the word spiritual is being used in corporate settings. It's certainly in New Zealand, if only through a karakia at the beginning and end of our meetings. But the need for sustainability, quote end quote, as marketing or as an add-on, so that we can polish the turd of business as usual, is not going to get us where we want to go. Currently, our approach to sustainability is nothing more than, I say this, I should back up. There are some great people doing great work that I can't, that I'm not worthy to point to in the world of sustainability, and amazing people, courageous people. However, a lot of what passes for sustainability seems to me to be little more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, trying to make each individual chair, whether it's an organisation or a government department or business, more green and more ethically made. And while that's noble and might make us feel more virtuous, changing the deck chairs on the Titanic is not going to do anything to address the speed, size, and direction of the ship itself. And to impact the speed, size, and direction of the ship, we need to more meaningfully collaborate. Direct competitors working with each other, governments working with each other, and to do that, we need an internal transformation, an inner development as human beings, because many of us, even though we might want that, our ego and our shadow self will necessarily sabotage it. We just don't have the skills. We've lost, some Indigenous communities notwithstanding, we've lost the skills to truly connect with Mother Earth and each other in a way that truly sees the sacredness of that which we long to protect.
This is hugely fascinating stuff, from and if we look at all the SDGs or IDGs, the commonality of connection is there. How do we truly connect and then find a way forward, right?
Yes.
Simple as that.
Well, again, that's I think the huge invitation and hope that I see in the IDGs. I completed the Inner Development Goal Ambassador training at the end of last year, so I'm officially an IDG ambassador, and I think all that means is that you use the word advocate. It's just I'm willing to advocate for a necessary internal transformation, such that our external work is genuine and authentic and is trustworthy. Again, I think so many people are just so skeptical of what so many businesses and organizations are doing in the realm of sustainability, because so much of it is marketing
and box ticking and greenwashing and bullshit.
Yes, or even those that mean well. So often it's in an attempt to minimize risk, and we're not going to achieve the level of human wholeness and sustainable development by ticking boxes and by minimizing risk and doing a few audits on our supply chain. It's going to take something far more fundamental, far more transformative, and require much more of us than that. And so I would say, unless an individual or organisation or a government is first of all even aware of that and is willing to do that work, such that when they walk into a room, they are aware of their ego, they are aware of their shadow, and they're aware of how those things play out, so that when they arise, they can take note of them and transcend them. One of the proudest moments I had before I left Kathmandu was Kathmandu signing an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with MacPac. So two direct competitors in a capitalist economy agreed to work together on their shared social and environmental supply chain challenges because they shared some of the same suppliers. I mean, what a story. Two direct competitors saying, we recognise that some of these sustainability ESG challenges are bigger than all of us, and we need to collaborate together and mutually benefit, not just sustainability wise either, but financially. It makes absolute sense. You're saving costs, you're sharing the costs of what you're implementing in your supply chain. Your influence is greater in terms of how you navigate and relate to your supply chain. So it makes huge business sense, let alone sustainability sense.
Wow. I mean, as I think I've said, it's quite the journey. But you to me are the perfect person to be consulting on, the modern day slavery, the sustainability aspects, but also being able to find and identify and work through your inner development goals. And I think that's great. How can listeners find you?
Well, website these days is the easiest way. It's garyshaw.co.nz, GARYSHAW.co.nz.
There'll be a link in the description.
That's probably the easiest way.
Mate, thank you very much. Looking forward to having you share a yarn in person next month, but really appreciate you and thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Matt.